right, good morning everyone. We're going to call Senate Health and Human Services to order, and we are staying in place. And so for those that are outside in the hall listening, we appreciate you participating. I'm Senator Deb Soholt from District 14 in Sioux Falls, and I'm chair of Senate Health and Human Services Committee. I think we're going to begin today. We're going to establish our quorum, and then we're going to take care of a few details. So, Rena, go ahead and call the roll.
Senators Doolittle.
Here.
Foster.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
Rush.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
Steinhauer.
Here.
Soho.
Here. All right, thank you. We have a quorum to do our business today. So really appreciate everyone that traveled to the capital city to participate in this process. I know this is a very important bill to everyone that's in the room and in the hallway and everyone that is seated in other places in the state of South Dakota and listening in on the internet. And we just really honor and respect that you are part of this public policy process. And that's why we're here. We serve at the behest of the people, and we are a citizen legislature, and we reside side by side in community with you. And so we really appreciate your participation as we develop policy. All right, we're going to begin. We have pages that actually leave their high school for 2 weeks and help us out. They do so many things for us that many on the surface would say, oh, that doesn't seem very important, but it's incredibly important. We couldn't do our work without them. So we have them come forward and introduce themselves, tell us where you're from. It's their first day of 2 weeks, so they're all excited. This is how it always is, and it's just for you. So introduce yourself, where you're from, and what are you thinking about moving forward in your life, where you headed possibly. I wouldn't have known at your age, but it's a trick question.
Hi, I'm Carter Linke. I'm from Woonsocket, South Dakota, and I plan on attending the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, which is double major in political science and communication studies.
Thank you for helping us out today, Carter.
No problem.
Hi, my name is Abram Shaws. I'm from Oak Mountain School, and not many people know it. I live kind of by the Edgemont area, like 5 or 10 minutes away from the border.
Okay.
So it took a long way to see.
Well, you're in the right state.
And then I'm planning to go to University of Wyoming with a reciprocal agreement, kind of, and major in psychology.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your help.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Just going to give a little bit of instruction. We're going to deal with some minutes, and then we'll take up our bill. First and foremost today, we're going to have a respectful conversation on all sides. This is a highly emotional issue that we're going to be embarking upon. And so my job as chair of this committee is to hold a container of respect even when we differ greatly in how we feel about something. So, and the other thing that we're going to do today is we're going to stay very specific to the bill. Now, I think sometimes that's hard to do when there's a lot of passion and emotion, especially when we have people coming from across the state and they want to, share how they feel. They end up going down a lane that doesn't necessarily apply to the bill. If that happens, I'm going to gently bring you back to the conversation. So I could use the gavel. I will not do that. I'll just say, let's stay germane to the bill. All right? And so that's just a redirect to get us back on course, because there's a lot of subjects that we could talk about in relationship to this bill. So we're going to stay just very focused today. The other thing is that we are going to do our best to have testimony from people that came to testify. But we've had to set some time limits in relationship to that, because there's going to be proponent testimony, opponent testimony, and after the opponent testimony, the prime sponsor or a delegate of the prime sponsor has an opportunity to provide rebuttal testimony. Then we open it up to questions. Then we bring it into committee discussion and action. So there's multiple steps of the process. So the folks on the proponent side and the opponent side already understand that each will have 37 minutes solid to do proponent and opponent. So I'm trying to think of a way. I think what we could do, if we don't get to people that testify, so lobbyists, what they do is they offer what's called a Me Too. And so we could consider, I'm going to maybe do a show of hands of how many Me Too's we have. We can also put into the minutes that, we had X amount of people that were also supportive of this bill or in opposition to this bill. and maybe that's how we'll have to handle it, because I have a feeling like 25 people's hands is gonna go up. And the time it would take to even just come up and say, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so, and it's a me too. But we're going to try to capture, to the best of our ability, the depth and the breadth of how people feel about this bill. So hopefully that sounds really great to everyone. So if you're thinking that you're going to testify, you'll need to sign up at the podium. Many of you already have, and there are roster sheets that look like this. Our amazing secretarial support, Rena Orban, really appreciates if you print legibly, so that we can apply that to the minutes. Okay, now is absolutely superb time for everyone to check their cell devices and put them on mute. It's really important that we are not interrupted. That can change the flow of people's thinking if we are interrupted by mobile devices. So thank you for doing that. Okay, Senators, we have before us the minutes of our meeting on February 7th.
Move to approve.
Senator Jensen, did you say that?
Move to? Yes.
Okay, it was moved by Senator Jensen, seconded by Senator Duhamel, that we accept the minutes of February 7th. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no? All right, okay, those minutes have been carried. All right, well, this is the time and the place that we are going to take up House Bill 1057, an act to prohibit certain acts against children. And I want to welcome the prime sponsor. Good morning, Representative.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you for having me. Good morning, Committee. Today I bring you House Bill 1057, the Vulnerable Child Protection Act. It's a bill that, should you agree to amend, will establish a civil cause of action for gender non-conforming young people if they come to believe they were harmed by medical professionals.
Representative,
Yes, Madam Chair.
did you have an amendment that you would like us to consider at this time?
Please, I do.
All right, can you give us that number, please?
Sure. It's Amendment 1057N as in Nancy.
So moved.
It is N. Okay, let's make sure we have it all in front of us, because there's a couple of amendments out there. So it has been moved, 1057N. We do not have an N in front of us, sir. We have a P.
Okay, well, let me check. Thank you. It is P.
Well, that is a relief,
1057
because we
P
would
as in
have
Paul.
scrambled. So the motion then is to move 1057P. Is there a second?
Second.
And it's been seconded. The motion has been made by Senator Russell and seconded by Senator Steinhauer that we would accept Amendment 1057P, which is an amendment offered by the prime sponsor. Is there further discussion on that motion? See no discussion. All in favor of incorporating 1057P will say aye. All opposed, no. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, 1057 is so amended. You can proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to be clear, the amendment replaces the criminal penalty in the bill, and it replaces it with a civil cause of action. Under the amended bill, doctors may not prescribe puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to gender non-conforming children under age 16, but there is no criminal penalty. Instead, you'll see in Section 3, there is a civil cause of action that's provided children. So the bill, as this amendment was developed, caused me to ask myself a couple things. Number one, does the bill continue to do its purpose, which is to protect vulnerable children? And I believe it does. And to me, that's the most important component of the amendment. Secondly, I asked myself, is it necessary? And so to answer that, I went to one of your colleagues in the Senate who specializes in malpractice law. And he assured me, gave me examples of why it is necessary. And if you would be so kind to support this bill so it gets to the floor, I would hope that there could be discussion amongst yourselves in debate over that question. So let me just give you an example of what this amended bill does. Let's say a doctor starts an 11-year-old girl on puberty blockers, Lupron, with her parents' consent, of course. Then at age 14, the girl identifies as a trans male and requests testosterone with her parents' consent, and the doctor prescribes it. Next, after taking testosterone for a year, she and her parents consent to and obtain a double mastectomy for her. In this example, the doctors will not face any penalty unless the child eventually regrets her transition and feels she suffered harm in the process. Then, under that circumstance, she'll have a cause of action against the doctors in court. So if this 11-year-old girl transitions by age 15 and at age 23 considers her permanently masculized voice, her 5 o'clock shadow, her missing breasts, and her infertility to be wrongful, we know her damaged body can't be repaired, but under the amended bill, the legislature will have provided her a way to pursue financial compensation through the court system until she turns age 38. This amended bill avoids criminalizing doctors. It avoids involving the state in the doctor-patient relationship, and it does not affect parental rights. To conclude, let's say our opponents are correct, and that these medical interventions that we'll be talking about are truly life-saving. Well then, so be it. But at very least, the amended bill puts doctors on notice that there are young victims expressing tragic regret. And in the event our opponents are wrong, then let's allow young people who experience regret the chance to pursue civil remedies. We can't give them their bodies back, but we can allow them to seek a remedy through the court system. I'd ask you to please support the amended bill, and I stand ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I believe now we are going to be taking phone testimony. Let's go. Online.
Hello?
He's on the phone. Yes, hi.
Hi.
Welcome to the committee, and we're ready for your proponent testimony. Would you please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. My name is Scott Newgent. I'm a 47-year-old transgender man from Dallas, Texas. So far, my insurance and myself has been billed just under $1 million to transition medically. And of course, I'll be dependent upon drugs and doctors for the rest of my life. First, let me explain why I'm calling in. Adult transgender in the majority are closeted, and we live a very normal life without being judged. But I could not do that, having 3 kids at the age they are transitioning kids now. I also have 100 medically transitioned adults that are standing behind me with a signed petition that are also against medical transitioning children. During my process, I've had many medical complications, some of them life-threatening. If you investigate medical transitioning, you will soon discover that complications are kind of glossed over as if you're changing your clothes, and it's certainly not the case. In 2017, I had a phalloplasty with Dr. Curtis Crane, who's considered the world-renowned top transgender surgeon. I went 17 months with a reoccurring bacteria infection that doctors couldn't fix or didn't want to fix. After seeking 8 different attorneys who initially took my case, they all decided not to take the case to court. And the reason why was, the last attorney told me, is that there are no baselines for transgender health. So to take a case like this, they would have to create that baseline, and that would be millions and millions in dollars. Unfortunately, though it was a cut and dry medical malpractice case, he couldn't take it because he couldn't spend that money to create a baseline for service. Now, undergoing this change was vital for me, and it's essential for other adults, some adults, but changes I went under emotionally, physically, spiritually, should never be offered to minors. I'm here to talk to you as a transgender man on behalf of myself and the 100 other transgender adults that also believe medically transitioning kids is wrong. Medical transitioning is dangerous, it's harmful, and in many ways it is irreversible. The opposition will likely tell you that the first step to the process for young children is puberty blockers and that it's reversible, but that's not true. As you will hear today, puberty blockers have many complicated risks. They are not reversible. Lupron, the manufacturer of this hormone blocker, was actually prosecuted by the U.S. government and fined $875 million for doing what they are doing now to politicians: false bribery and false advertising. No doctor, psychologist, parent, or anyone else has the right to sign up these kids to become sterile for life and be locked into the medical system for life. Only an adult has the right to decide this about their own body. A child has not developed enough logic or complex thought process to make this decision either. They cannot see around corners to understand what they're doing. Now, you may hear the opposition say that not allowing kids to get puberty blockers and opposite birth hormones will increase suicide, but it's actually the opposite. When these kids are medically transitioned, hit 25, and they realize they are locked into the medical system for life, that this was a phase that a lot of preteens go through. They cannot have biological surgery. They have early onset osteoporosis and surgeries that left their body damaged. They'll be thinking of this while they're wearing diapers for life. This is when we will see a true suicide epidemic. Please protect vulnerable children and vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Now, someone may end up having questions, but I think it's going to be difficult to hang on to this phone call probably for the entire hearing. You can stay on if you want to listen in that way, and we will continue on. So, the proponent testimony on 1057 is amended. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I am Lisa Gennaro, legislative lobbyist for Concerned Women of America, LAC. I am here today to read the following statement for Cindy Wright, a 20-year-old woman who is unable to attend today. This is her statement. I, Cindy Wright, spent a year as a trans man. 2 years ago, I was a healthy, beautiful girl heading toward high school graduation, but after taking testosterone for a year, I turned into an overweight, pre-diabetic nightmare of a transgender man. I'm here to speak today because I am one of many young women who have been failed by the medical system. I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria, a mental health condition. I was treated with mega doses of powerful testosterone that ravaged my body, caused me to gain 50 pounds, and put me at risk for heart disease, diabetes, and teenage menopause. I'm not putting all the blame on the mental health people or the doctors. These are regretful choices I made as a teenager. But I trusted the doctor's advice. They were the expert. Who was I not to listen to their advice? But telling an 18-year-old girl that mega doses of testosterone would fix her mental health problems? They didn't even talk to me about other treatment options. No doctor or therapist suggested I give myself time to grow up, or wait and see what happens with counseling sessions. No doctors or therapists told me most young people outgrow their feelings of wanting to be the opposite sex. The only advice I got was to take mega doses of testosterone. I did this to myself for almost a year. Meanwhile, my mom was crying daily about why I was doing this to myself, all the while blaming herself. Finally, one day, my grandfather sat me down to talk about it. With tears in his eyes, he asked me to stop. That was my saving grace. I would have let this treatment kill me before admitting I had screwed up. His intervention saved my life. Today I continue to deal with the permanent side effects of messing up my body. I am not a political person. I'm just a young person that needed help from doctors and unfortunately got caught up in the medical scandal. More and more young people are being deceived every day, being told that the solution to their insecurity and identity problem is to get a sex change. The problem is, a person's sex can't really be changed. You can take hormones and have cosmetic surgeries, but that doesn't really change your sex or solve your problems. I wish I knew that when I was younger. It's not known how many detransitioners like me exist, but there are lots of us, all with similar stories of medical abuse, medical mutilation, and no real treatment options other than medical transition. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story with you. As a former trans man that learned a very hard lesson, I ask you to please support this bill. You will save the lives of more young people than you can possibly fathom. Please be courageous and vote yes.
Thank you, Ms. Gennaro. Because you read a statement on someone else's behalf, could you share where Sydney is from?
I don't, Georgia, sorry. I talked to her the other day and I didn't ask her, I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
All right, further proponent testimony on 1057 as amended. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Dr. Michael Laidlaw, board certified specialist in endocrinology. I've written extensively on this topic. There are only two sexes. It's not scientifically possible.
Excuse me, where are you from?
Oh, I'm sorry, Rockland, California.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There's only two sexes, and it's not scientifically possible to turn a boy into a woman or a girl into a man. Yet this is exactly what's being attempted in an experimental, dangerous protocol called affirmative care. First note, this is not standard of care. From the Endocrine Society guidelines, the disclaimer states they do not establish a standard of care. Does a controlled study exist that compares, say, kids on puberty blockers to those not on blockers? This would be helpful to know, right? No such study exists. Instead, there are activist researchers doing this sort of study, performing mastectomies on 13 and 14 and 15-year-old girls. These girls can never get functioning breasts back. Now, this same group also lowered the age for girls getting testosterone down to 8 years old. Can you imagine an 8-year-old girl getting testosterone? Is this the type of activist science that you want to depend to make your decisions? You wouldn't trust cigarette manufacturers to give you health information on cigarettes. Why trust activists to give you true information on these harmful hormones? Bad science brings harms to people. 23-year-old Cara Bell received experimental treatments, including puberty blockers, and is part of a lawsuit right now against the UK's Gender Service. She says this: hormones and surgery should not be offered to someone under 18. The treatment urgently needs to change so young people like me are not put on a torturous path that is permanent. Serious doubts are being published in medical journals worldwide. Puberty blockers have been called a momentous step in the dark. Worldwide calls for and investigations are occurring in Sweden, the UK, Australia, and Brazil right now. You have to understand, puberty blocking medications given at the time of puberty, normal puberty, cause a disease state because they're freezing normal development. This is different than precocious premature puberty. Harms include sexual dysfunction, infertility, osteoporosis risk. A key period of bone and brain development is lost forever by doing this. In a study of kids on puberty blockers, all 70 of those kids decided to go onto cross-sex hormones. They didn't pause and wait, they went onto it. And most of them had gender-changing surgeries. Testosterone is being used on girls at super high doses, 10 to 40 times above the normal female level. Side effects include hypertension, cancer risk, permanent lowering of the voice. Males on estrogen have 5 times risk of deadly blood clots, increased risk of stroke, male breast cancer. For both sexes, there's an increased risk of heart attack and death from cardiovascular disease. These hormones are a pathway to sterilization. Surgeries for males include dissecting the penis and placing it into a pelvic wound, removal of the testicles. For girls, removal of the skin of the forearm and then rolled up to look like a penis, and then ovary removal. Surgical complications, you've heard some already: serious infection, chronic pain, urethral strictures, and even death. There are no rigorous long-term studies that show that these hormonal and surgical procedures that I've talked about have any beneficial effect. But what we do know is that 85% or more of young children who suffer from gender confusion, if simply supported through normal puberty, will ultimately embrace their own bodies, not with puberty blockers. The treatment is to allow them and support them through puberty. That's the treatment. Laura shared her testimony of regret and then healing. I took testosterone and I had 2 botched mastectomy surgeries. I started using drugs, but I'm very grateful I didn't make myself infertile. I'm a mother now. Please put the Vulnerable Child Protection Act in the books to help protect South Dakota kids from permanent harms. Thank you all.
Thank you. Further proponent testimony, House Bill 1057 is amended. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Dr. Don Oliver. I'm a board-certified pediatrician with over 4 decades of experience, 39 years in Rapid City. I was a longtime member of the American Academy of Pediatrics. You need to know that the AAP's policy statement in favor of medical intervention for trans-identified minors was recently fact-checked and discredited as a grave misrepresentation of science. In fact, many medical organizations around the world characterize using puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in youth as experimental and dangerous. There's a world-renowned child psychiatrist named Christopher Gilbert, and I'm quoting his words. He referred to this as possibly one of the greatest scandals in medical history. And he has called for an immediate moratorium on the use of puberty-blocking drugs because of their unknown long-term side effects. There is no evidence that puberty blockers are harmless for gender-distressed children. To the contrary, when normal puberty is arrested, valuable time is forever stolen from these children, time that should be spent in normal development. This time period, during which significant advances in bone, brain, and sexual development occur, is time and development that can never be given back. According to a recent Kaiser Health News report, many young women treated with Lupron as children are now suffering from lifelong osteoporosis, anxiety, and even seizures. Among young men treated with Lupron as children, there is evidence of an increased risk of testicular cancer. Temporary use of puberty blockers in children during normal puberty can cause lifetime
Excuse me,
harm.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's inappropriate to try to hand things to senators from the audience, so I just wanted to make sure that we proceed. I apologize for interrupting your testimony. Go ahead.
Thank you,
proceed.
Madam Chair. Most used on puberty blockers will also take cross-sex hormones, putting them at increased risk for heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, blood clots, cancer, and more across their lifespans. The best long-term evidence we have among adults shows that medical intervention fails to reduce suicide. Finally, and on a personal note, I am on Lupron and another testosterone blocker for the treatment of advanced prostate cancer, the condition that these drugs were developed for. I have first-hand experience with the side effects of these drugs. I am grateful for them. They keep my cancer at bay. But I would not want any South Dakota child or anywhere else to have to experience them. Minors and parents are being misled by a medical establishment driven by a dangerous ideology at the expense of children's lives. Please vote for House Bill 1057, the Vulnerable Child Protection Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Further proponent testimony. Amended House Bill 1057. Good morning, it's been a long time.
It has been.
Welcome.
Thank you for allowing me here, Chairman Soholt. I'm Glenn Ritter, family physician in South Dakota since 1992. I'm also the state medical director of the National Catholic Medical Association. It's an organization around the country that represents thousands of American physicians of all specialties. And as you've heard, we're not alone. The proponents of this bill here today are not alone. Dr. Oliver testified that people have stated this is possibly one of the greatest scandals in medical history. The Australian College of Physicians, over 200 physicians represent this statement, 9 psychiatrists, 9 pediatricians, and university professors. calling for an urgent national inquiry into unsubstantiated protocols. In the UK in 2019, they stated there is a significant lack of robust, comprehensive evidence around the outcomes. In Sweden, they state that this matter, this treatment, quote unquote, raises a number of difficult ethical questions that it cannot answer. Psychiatrist Christopher Gilberg in Sweden's Gothenburg University states that the unproven treatment is absolutely horrendous, and again calls for an immediate moratorium on the use because of the unknown long-term effects. And Dr. Richard Bing from the Community of Primary Care Research from the UK has a letter to the Lancet in 2019. The evidence does not consider long-term ill effects. As already stated, the American Academy of Pediatricians has a fact-checked statement that's found to contradict every single reference it cites to support that they thought was supportive. Most of these children are ordinary boys and girls who are anxious, depressed, traumatized, who question their bodies and the struggle with their identity, a situation not uncommon during childhood and puberty. Reality reveals, however, that 80% of these gender-confused children will embrace their birth gender by the time of adulthood. If nothing else is done, other than the emotional support and obviously FDA-approved conventional medicine provided for any accompanying psychiatric diagnoses. Reality reveals that 100% of these children claim dysphoria. If they are all enlisted in one of these off-label, unscientific, quote-unquote, protocols to affirm and render puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and thus push them into ideologic path, their decision is wrong 80% of the time. That is, 80% will be wrongly harmed. 80% will have no way of retrieving their youth or regaining lost time required by all the rest of us to mature into healthy birth-determined gender, and they will forfeit their potential for being fully functional adults in our society. Sterilizing and mutilating these children, turning them to lifelong patients, should be considered criminal acts. And if the medical societies like the AAP, pediatricians, psychiatric medicine, and other medical societies have disavowed good medicine of science and ethics, or are just not interested in policing their own members, we in society have the obligation to our children to protect their rights and their lives. Please vote for the Vulnerable Child Protection Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ritter. Good to see you. Further proponent testimony. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Dr. Alan Hoekman, a board-certified pediatrician ministering to children and their families in Watertown, South Dakota for the last 15 years. In recent years, the number of young people identifying them as transgender has skyrocketed. What do we do? The American Academy of Pediatrics endorses affirmation therapy with puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries, each with their own complications. That disturbs me. Why would you take a physiologically normal young person with a psychiatric diagnosis and treat him with the aforementioned methods? I don't get it. We don't let adolescents under the age of 18 smoke, vape, quit school, drink alcohol. Why would we let them venture down this road of affirmation therapy? The option of giving them emotional and psychological support through normal puberty is real and should be offered. Let's face it, I don't like the government in my medical office with my patient and parent. The government's there already. I have to kowtow to Medicaid rules and report any suspicion of child abuse. In this issue we discussed today, I believe we need the government to push the pause button so that Number one, young people have a chance to go through puberty and can make this decision later. And number two, so medical societies and researchers can get good long-term data. But what bothers me about waiting and others forging ahead is there are children and families in other states and countries who will suffer because of this. Please endorse House Bill 1057. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you. Further proponent testimony, House Bill 1057 amended. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Alan Hopewell. I'm from Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm a fellow of the American Psychological Association. I'm also currently an assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of North Texas Medical Center, where I teach psychiatrists, psychologists, licensed professional counselors, and others. And I'd like to tip my hat to the gentleman over here who wants to major in psychology. So it's a wonderful, wonderful field. Thank you for the opportunity for me to come here to South Dakota, although I'm not from South Dakota. I'm not an activist or don't have an activist viewpoint in this issue. I'm a retired military officer, 27 years. I'm doing now private practice and teaching, and I'm the past president of the Texas Psychological Association, as well as a fellow of the APA. Now, I'm not a representative of the American Psychological Association, but being a fellow, that's the highest ranking honor given to a member of the American Psychological Association, other than something like its Lifetime Achievement Awards. While I was training early in my career, my first training was at the University of Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. I'm a medically trained psychologist. That seems a long time ago. That was 1975. The reason I mention that is that while I trained at the medical branch, I was the chief psychology resident on the transsexual team. So I actually did this as part of my training. As part of the chief of that service, I did all the psychological assessments for everyone who's considering service or surgery. The facts haven't changed since 1975. This isn't a new issue. This has been going on, the same arguments, the same issues. And one other issue that is probably predominant with this is the assertion that if people are not allowed to affirm or to transition or commit suicide. Part of the research that we've done, which was not on this specific issue, at the medical branch in Dallas, was with the American Psychological Association's massive suicide program, of which I was a part, and we studied every suicide admitted to an emergency room throughout Texas. I won't go into all the details. This doesn't happen. In 47 years, I've never had kids come to me and say, I'm going to commit suicide with a serious suicide intent. We measured emergency rooms. We measured the suicidal rates. That's really not an issue. Again, the facts haven't changed. When I was a resident, people would come concerned about their bodies, concerned about transitioning. They had mostly mental health issues. They needed to be treated. They had gotten a lot of information. There was no internet then, but they got a lot of information from journal articles, from other individuals. So they had information they brought in. They turned out on the team that we worked with that after the completion of some surgery or after the completion of their affirmation, frequently they were actually worse because at that point they realized there was nothing else that could be done. And frankly, I'll be fairly blunt here, they would say, oh my goodness, I realize I can't ever be a real woman or a real man, and I'm left with these problems that I'm facing now. So the major emphasis for psychological treatment needed to be at the beginning of that phase as well as the end of the phase, because that's where we saw probably real increase in suicide numbers at that portion. And nobody kept data back in those days. Data has been kept recently, mostly by Sweden, in that Sweden, most of the studies are unreliable, but Sweden followed every single patient that underwent transition surgery in Sweden, followed them up, and found a 19 times increase in suicidal behavior and suicide after completion of all this surgery. So that well illustrates the emotional and the psychological issues that these folks are facing. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I've treated people for all of my career, children and adults, and this is one way I see in protecting children, and I urge you to vote for this bill in the affirmative. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hopewell. We will have 5 minutes left for proponent testimony. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for having me here in South Dakota today. My name is Karin Dansky, and I live in Washington, D.C. I am an attorney, a radical feminist, a lifelong Democrat, and a former senior counsel at the ACLU National Office's Center for Justice. I serve on the board of the Women's Liberation Front, known as WOLF. I am here today primarily to address the unsupported assertion that House Bill 1057 is unconstitutional. This modest bill would create a civil cause of action for young people who end up regretting their childhood decision to undergo medically unnecessary and harmful medical procedures that can result in permanent sterilization. Similar bills have been filed in Florida, Colorado, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Litigation appears to be likely in one or more of these states if one of these bills passes, though it is not at all clear that such litigation would necessarily arise in South Dakota. The ACLU of South Dakota has proclaimed that it is unconstitutional to single out one group of people and categorically ban all care, no matter how medically necessary. But it is not at all obvious why this bill might be unconstitutional. If the ACLU is relying on the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause for its assertion that the bill is unconstitutional, this would be flawed. Equal protection analysis involves a complicated legal examination of what degree of scrutiny should apply to a particular individual or group's claim regarding discrimination. Crucially, however, this presupposes the existence of a definable class of persons. As Wolf has repeatedly argued, transgender identity is not a class of people that has been defined in any meaningful or non-circular way. Even more importantly, the court's statement in a case called Reed versus Reed, where it first recognized the importance of protecting the characteristic of sex under the Equal Protection Clause, that this court has consistently recognized that the 14th Amendment does not deny to states the power to treat different classes of persons in different ways, gives the lie to the ACLU's vague and unsupported claim that this bill is unconstitutional. Finally, the Supreme Court has said that many of the rights and liberties protected by the Due Process Clause sound in personal autonomy does not warrant the sweeping conclusion that any and all important, intimate, and personal decisions are so protected. There is simply no reason to believe at this time that a court would rule that a minor's ability to make decisions that are likely to cause irreversible physiological damage is constitutionally protected. Let's be clear about what we are talking about here. This modest bill would create a civil remedy for young people who regret their decisions to undergo procedures that can result in disease, loss of organs, and permanent sterility. The single most compassionate thing our society can do for children who are struggling is to encourage them to accept themselves exactly as they are. Thank you for your time today. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Further proponent testimony.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Chris Motz. I'm the Executive Director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, which represents the Catholic bishops of South Dakota. God saw everything that he had made, and he said, behold, it is very good. Every human person has in his or her heart the desire to be affirmed, the desire to be loved, the desire to be called very good. This desire can be especially prominent during times of suffering or pain, and rightly elicits compassion. We are given this desire, indeed given our very life, by our Creator. He sees us, he loves us. Every human person deserves to know this, that our Maker looks upon us as we are, male and female, soul and body, and as we are, he calls us very good. The surgical and pharmaceutical interventions described in this bill are wrong, and they're particularly serious when applied to the young. I thank you for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. We have 35 seconds. So so we have time for the two extra people to introduce and do a Me Too.
Yes, Madam Chair, in the interest of time, Norman Woods, FHA Action, just Me Too. The handout is just some of the organizations that have endorsed 1057. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there one further proponent Me Too?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Brock Greenfield, Senate District 2, and I too would like to register my support for this bill.
Thank you, Senator.
Dr. Tamara Grove, South Dakota Family Policy Council, we support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well done. We are spot on, 37 minutes. All right. We will now move into 37 minutes of opposition testimony to 1057 as amended. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mitch. I'll be here representing Sanford Health from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. With your permission, we have a couple handouts. If the page could distribute that to members, that would be fantastic. They are under. Thank you.
Would you hold those up, please? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. For all patients at Sanford Health, including transgender patients, we follow well-established standards of care. This includes policies set forth by insurance companies and national recognized medical organizations. With these guidelines in place for treatment, we believe this legislation would be an overreach and governmental intrusion into the exam room between parents, their families, and providers. At Sanford, we feel that healthcare decisions are private and personal matters, not a business of the government. We also feel that House Bill 1057 is an unnecessary bill in South Dakota. In 2019, Sanford Health saw over 1 million patients across our system. Of that 1 million, less than 20 patients were treated for gender dysphoria, and not all of those were South Dakota residents. This shows that this is not an industry, rather a handful of individuals that are coming to us for treatment. At Sanford, we are in the business of healthcare. Our teams of physicians are here to help our patients, regardless of ideology. I will hand the podium over to Dr. Hansen. Thank you for allowing me to testify, and I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rave. Good morning. Welcome, Dr. Hansen.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and esteemed members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Keith Hansen. I'm a board certified and maintain certification in reproductive endocrinology and pediatric and adolescent gynecology at Sanford Health. I have come here to testify as lobbyist for Sanford Health and in my individual capacity as a concerned citizen. I have not been authorized to testify to this bill on behalf of the South Dakota Board of Regents, University of South Dakota, or the Sanford School of Medicine. Healthcare is not an ideology, but the evaluation and treatment of medical conditions using the best current evidence-based approaches. Gender dysphoria is such a complex medical condition requiring a multidisciplinary, evidence-based approach for successful treatment. Treatment has demonstrated significant reductions in suicidal ideation, suicide, depression, anxiety, and self-harm. In South Dakota, like everywhere else in the country and in the world, there's a, it's kind of like a pyramid. There's a large number of patients who enter the bottom of the pyramid and very few that make it up to the upper levels, to the medical therapies and such. In fact, I went back and pulled the records from 2019, and I saw 19 patients who were 18 years of age or older or less for gender dysphoria. We have handed out some handouts, which I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll try to summarize. It's a lot of the different people who have given out guidelines for the management of gender dysphoria in adolescents and pediatric patients. The first phase of this management always involves counseling and the social transitioning of the individual. This is a very intensive counseling. They go through it for a long period of time with multiple sessions with trained psychologists. Then and only then are they referred on to me, where they undergo an extensive history, physical examination, laboratory data, imaging studies, and then at that point, they're monitored until they reach Tanner stage 2 of development. And at the same time, they're being monitored by the psychologist, because that's part of the diagnosis of gender dysphoria is when they enter puberty, they have an extreme amount of distress. And at that point is when they're started on the pubertal blockers. The pubertal blockers which are completely reversible in terms of the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. In other words, puberty starts again once you stop them, is continued. And then at about, as long as the patient continues through the psychological counseling, at around age 16, they'll be initiated on the appropriate gender-affirming hormones, so testosterone in the trans male and estrogen in the trans female. Surgeries are not done until the patient reaches majority in their country. And the reason I have to say in the country is all these guidelines are based on the world. And so the surgeries would only be done at that stage. I put one article in there, which is a study out of Sweden, where they looked at over 6,793 people from 75 to 2015, from 72 to 2015, and only 0.6%, so less than 1% of trans women and less than 1% of trans men who actually went all the way through the process and had a gonadectomy, so removal of the testicles in a trans woman and removal of the ovaries in a trans male, actually regretted it. So it's less than 1%, much less than things like cardiac surgeries and other medical interventions. So Sanford Health and I practice medicine a compassionate, evidence-based approach to give our patients the best up-to-date care. Medical care for transgender adolescents is complex and requires understanding normal puberty, pediatric and adolescent development, and an up-to-date multidisciplinary approach with parental support and guidance. In South Dakota, the parents are always involved at all levels of care of these patients and spend many hours, many times very long hours, discussing all the different options that are available for their child with the counselor and with me. Once again, thank you for this opportunity to testify in opposition to House Bill 1057. I respectfully request that you vote against this bill for the health of the children of South Dakota. Thank you.
Thank you. Further opponent testimony, on House Bill 1057 as amended. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dean Krogman, I represent South Dakota State Medical Association, and I have handed out a issue brief from the American Medical Association, not handed out, but I would like to have it registered in the minutes, if that would be okay. I'm going to be very brief. That is the same one. Yeah. I didn't hand it out. I just gave the one. There are
just
some
the
individuals that do that.
All right, go ahead.
The point, I'm going to talk just to that. And even with the amendments, the association would be against this bill on the basis of this brief that states American Medical Association has stated that it's discriminatory, basically. The information in that brief states there are 20 states that make it illegal to discriminate in terms of coverage. Surgery is considered one of the options in this science-based medical diagnosis. And those 20 states, along with the Affordable Care Act, has a section in there that says it is illegal to discriminate on treatment. Not only the Affordable Care Act, but the Health and Human Services, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in 2014 rescinded on the idea that surgery was prohibited. And it is considered discriminatory if we take away the ability to be treated, and the treatments are listed, the states are listed, and I don't think we want to be the only state in the nation that discriminates against the demographic of our society. And we would be the only state in the nation if we pass this law. Thank you.
Thank you. Further opponent testimony, House Bill 1057 is amended.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lindsey Riter-Rapp, and I'm a registered lobbyist for the South Dakota chapter of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and we do oppose House Bill 1057. OBGYNs dedicate their careers and their lives to securing healthy futures for patients and their families by providing evidence-based, patient-centered health care. This includes providing adolescent patients and their families with a trusting, confidential environment where they can access care and information. We're opposed to House Bill 1057 for two primary reasons. First, while the criminal penalties were removed with the amendment, we think that the amendment really does indirectly what the original bill did directly, and it creates a specific remedy for a cause of action, which is akin to almost like strict liability, with no limitation on the damages or the type and nature of them. Second, we oppose this bill because we think it dangerously interferes with the patient-physician relationship. Our members strongly oppose any governmental interference that causes a physician to compromise his or her medical judgment about what information or treatment is in the best interest of the patient. Governmental interference with the ability of physicians to have open, honest, and confidential communications with their patients is a dangerous precedent. House Bill 1057 would run afoul of the bedrocks of the patient-physician relationship, as adolescents and their families often present to a gynecologist to discuss confidential issues with them. If this legislation is passed, it will only serve to drive a wedge between patients and their physicians at a time when they need the support and counsel of their healthcare provider the most. Our members believe that we share a common goal with this legislative body, and that is to improve the health and well-being of adolescent patients. We urge you to recognize that this legislation would have the opposite effect and would undermine the ability of doctors to provide patient-centered care to some of our most at-risk youth. And for those reasons, we do oppose the bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Further opponent testimony, House Bill 1057 as amended. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you this morning. My name is Kristen Carter. I'm a doctor of pharmacy, a pharmacy manager here in Pierre, South Dakota, and the current vice president of the South Dakota Pharmacists Association. The South Dakota Pharmacists Association's commercial and legislative branch also rises in opposition to House Bill 1057 as amended. While we understand pharmacists are not explicitly named in the list of medical professionals this bill addresses, the language in Section 2, Line 3 of prescribing, dispensing, administering, or otherwise supplying the following medications causes us great concern and highlights what we feel is an unintended consequence of this bill, because the overwhelming majority of the time, pharmacists are the dispensing function described here. When we receive a prescription from the physician's office, it is not required to include a diagnosis or any particular indication or explanation as to the reason that medication is being prescribed. Since there are circumstances other than those addressed in this bill to prescribe the listed medications to individuals under 16, such as central precocious puberty, endometriosis, and uterine fibroids, we feel this puts a pharmacist in a very unfortunate and frankly frightening position, that just by virtue of doing our jobs, by simply filling the prescription, we could be unknowingly liable. As pharmacists, we would appreciate your no vote in this bill. I thank you for your time this morning, and I will stand by for questions.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony, House Bill 1057 is amended. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Michaela Seiber. I'm the tribal member of the Sisseton-Wahpeton-Oyate. I grew up in Sisseton, but have called Sioux Falls home for the last 8 years. I have a master's in public health from the University of South Dakota and have been a public health researcher for the last 6 years, doing community research now in Sioux Falls. I'm here on my own behalf, but I'm also an executive board member of the Transformation Project, a South Dakota nonprofit that exists to support trans youth and young adults in our state. As a researcher, I'm taught to do extensive literature reviews, analyze sources, and critique studies to ensure I'm getting a complete picture of what I'm learning about. If I'm presented with a point that contradicts my hypothesis, I will look even harder so that my final answer is not biased. I followed my usual methods when HB 1057 was introduced, and we saw the data that the prime sponsor was using to justify this bill was not what he thought it was. What I found was this: the utilization of cherry-picked results, inaccurate interpretations of studies, no effort in compiling a complete anthology of research studies regarding the topic at hand, the claim that a large percentage of kids will persist as their sex assigned at birth if they are allowed to go through puberty, This was incredibly inaccurate, and the methodology behind these studies has been highly criticized by researchers and scientists throughout the country. Every year we have these bills presented under the cover of protection and supported by data and research. I'm here to tell you that the data and research utilized every year is misleading and morphed, mistakes that ethical scientists and researchers would not make. Every year I do what I was taught to do, a search of the literature and a critical analysis of the methodology of the studies I find. During my review of the topics surrounding this bill, I also found the following. Not starting puberty blockers is what actually leads to irreversible changes. The likelihood of severe side effects, like the sponsor has claimed, is low. The best way to treat trans kids is to actually pause puberty at the first sign of pubertal changes, which gives them the true pause they need. The number of people who desist or detransition is low, as Dr. Hansen pointed out, and often comes from societal pressures and societal norms of gender roles and what it means to be a man or a woman. And finally, trans kids succeed when they are surrounded by supportive adults and communities, not exposed to the dangerous conversation that we've seen take place here in our state. I have 5 pages worth of points from these studies, all of which overwhelmingly lean towards supporting trans kids in every way we can, which means letting them, their families, and doctors decide what's best for them. The amendment made to this bill does not negate the violent, inaccurate rhetoric that is formed around the issue. Our kids are watching, and our trans kids are scared to exist. Please vote no on this bill.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony, House Bill 1057 is amended.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Committee.
Good morning, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Karin Eagle, and I am a member of the Oglala Dakota Nation. I was asked by President Julie Barron to deliver a message to you. And so, for the record, I will read his statement. As the president of the Oglala Sioux tribe, I take great offense when our civil liberties come under fire by government officials, when laws are used as weapons to prohibit the movement and prosperity of my people. The bills being proposed in here to restrict our transgender relatives from receiving medications needed to become who they are is not only unconstitutional, but it goes against who we are as a people, as a nation. I feel that if we enact laws that limit one's ability to rightfully become who they truly are on the inside, then we are no longer human beings. Laws are to be enacted to protect the rights and freedom of the people, to protect life and property. Regardless of age, one knows inside who they truly are. And to put an age requirement on a free person to rightfully become who they are is and will be detrimental to the health and general welfare of the Oyate. Every day our young people fight to live, to be who they are, and every day there are people in this world who tell them that they are wrong or they can't achieve what they desire in life and prevent them from living to their full potential. Actions as such eventually lead to the mental health issue and crisis that we face every day on the reservation. Our young people already have so many obstacles and people holding them down. They don't need laws to also hold them down. As leadership, we are to never discriminate on age, gender, creed, or sexual orientation. However, we are to protect our people and promote the health and general welfare of our people. Midakoye Onyase, Wopila Julian Bear Runner, President of Oglala Sioux Tribe. And with that, the Oglala Lakota Nation opposes this bill.
Thank you. Further opponent testimony, House Bill 1057.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, David Owen, South Dakota Chamber of Commerce and Industry. When we were in the House, the Speaker suggested I should do better research, so I did. We are concerned about the inadvertent economic consequences this bill may bring to South Dakota, which we are afraid is similar to what North Carolina did. Here is that list. PayPal was going to locate in North Carolina, canceled that expansion. The NBA pulled the All-Star game. The NCAA and ACC canceled championship game. Deutsch Bank canceled an expansion. Several concerts and conventions were canceled. This money will never go to North Carolina. The proponents have suggested that the increased sales tax in North Carolina and their growing GDP is an answer that says that this didn't matter. You don't get this money back. That's like arguing cutting the arm off a teenager doesn't count because they got taller. These inadvertent economic consequences are already being discussed in South Dakota. We have members that are large employers that have called and said they want to support states that are inclusive. Their employment practices are inclusive. My final point is the world is watching now. We've already seen the headlines. The world is not going to ask which version of this bill did you pass. The world is going to ask, did you pass that bill? Please do not pass that bill.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony, House Bill 1057 is amended. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Bill Van Camp, a lawyer from Pierre and a registered lobbyist for the South Dakota Retailers Association. I'll be very brief. David Owen touched on the retailers' reason for opposing this bill too. Some of you might have seen a letter from TechNet that I was given. That's a consortium of 80 technology companies doing business all over the nation and including in South Dakota, some of whom are members of the Retailers Association. And that letter cautions that any legislation or that implicitly targets LGBTQ people as an economic liability for the state of South Dakota. So you have to ask yourself, and I think Mr. Owen is exactly right, why would you do this? Is it really a South Dakota issue? Is it a South Dakota problem? The group of technology companies, again, cautions legislators from doing anything that would make it more challenging for people in that industry, and I would argue all industries in South Dakota, to compete for talented and highly educated workers that people are looking to hire and bring to this state. And we think this discriminatory legislation does not do that. We think it's bad for South Dakota and should be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony. Good morning. Welcome to Senate Health and Human Services.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members, or Chairwoman, pardon me, and members of the committee. I am Deborah Owen, and I represent the Sioux Falls Area Chamber of Commerce. We have over 2,000 members and represent about 80,000 employees in the greater Sioux Falls area. We rise in opposition to this bill, and I don't want to repeat a lot of what has been done by the business community, but we do have grave concerns about the larger impact of this bill on our state and on our economy. My colleagues in North Carolina and I visited last year about the impact or the stigma that House Bill 2 is still on that state. They still have trouble with people relocating once they find out North Carolina's track record with House Bill 2. Moreover, we expressed concern about House Bill 1057 making South Dakota the test case for the country. We think that also it would be challenged in court should it pass. The bottom line is this: as South Dakota moves forward and seeks to be open for business, diversity and inclusion is not an option. Diversity and inclusion is fundamental to the economic development of our state. Please vote no on 1057. Thank you.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony. Good morning. Welcome.
Hamatak Yapi, Lamp and Tikile, EU Hachande, Washington and Chusi Yapi, Imach Yapi, Chante Michaelami, Imach Yapi, Chante Michaelami, Wakanton, EU Yampawi. I would like to greet each and every one of you with a handshake from my heart. Good morning. Thank you, Madam and Chairwoman, and everyone else here who's open to listening. I am a staff member.
Please introduce yourself and where you're from.
Oh, excuse me.
Thank
My
you.
name is Candy Bruce Penny. I'm a Walla Lakota Sioux, and I identify as a queer Indigenous, Two-Spirit, non-binary. And I am a staff member of the ACLU and a lobbyist. And I wanted to make it very clear that I am representing the ACLU here in this room, regardless of any other proponents you may have heard, however long they may have worked for the ACLU. First of all, I wanted to make it the voice of the ACLU to be heard that we oppose this bill for many reasons. But first and foremost is the fact that it will cause great harm to transgender youth across South Dakota. We have spoken to many transgender youth and families since this bill was filed. And what they have said is that they are frightened and they feel attacked by this legislation. These kids, like all kids in South Dakota, deserve a chance to experience joy, to be supported, to get the health care they need, and to thrive. When the government proposes laws that would stigmatize them and undermine their care, they lose their opportunities. Nothing we have heard today has changed our position on the bill's constitutionality. If it becomes law, we will pursue litigation. We'll be with Tonka, Ritakiase. Thank you from the depths of my heart. You're all related.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony, House Bill 1057 is amended. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee for allowing me to be here this day. My name is Lauren Stanley. I am the Superintendent Presbyter of the Rosebud Episcopal Mission West on the Rosebud Reservation. I serve Nisichangu Dakota Oyate. I have many reasons for being here today, but the most important is this. I work with our children. I work with children from the ages of 2 all the way through their adulthood. I am the person on the Rosebud who is called when one of our children takes their own life, when they lose their life to suicide. I am the one who has to comfort the families. I am the one who has to work with the pallbearers who are all the same age as the child who has left this world. I am the one who has to make sense of these tragedies. This bill will take children who are already depressed, who are already anxious, who are already cutting themselves, who are afraid to walk in a world in their own culture which supports them as being two-spirited, because the white culture has told them that they cannot be two-spirited. And this bill will cause more of my children to harm themselves. They will be the ones who will suffer. I work with children who are depressed, and despite what the proponents have said today, children who are transgendered in this country and in many countries around the world, but in this state, are terrified. And they are harming themselves. I am asking you to defeat this bill, because if you do not, I am guaranteeing you that at least one child on the Rosebud will make his or her journey out of fear, out of depression, out of oppression. And if that child makes that journey, I want to know, are those who supported this bill going to come to the Rosebud? Will you be there to comfort the family in the hospital? Will you be there for our wakes? Will you be there for the funeral? Will you take the shovel and help bury that child? Will you pick up the flowers and place them on the graves? Will you come and explain why an oppressive bill that is not necessary, that interferes with parents and with a medical profession, why you pass that bill to the families and friends of the children who are going to die because of this? I deal with suicide on our reservation and suicide attempts every week. Please defeat this bill, because if this bill passes, I will call every member of the legislature that supported it, and I will call the governor's office if she signs it, and I will demand that you come to the next funeral that I have to do, so you can explain why this harm is being done to my babies. I thank you for this time.
Thank you. Further opposition to House Bill 1057 is amended. Somebody needs to come up. We've got about 9 minutes to go on opposition testimony. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tamara. I've lived in South Dakota my entire life. This is my middle child, Quincy. When I testified before the House Committee a few weeks ago, I was nervous. Today, I'm just heartbroken. I am heartbroken because I allowed that committee into my personal life. I told them the burden that this bill places on myself and my child and others like us, but they didn't listen. Quinn has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and identifies as non-binary. After years of increasing anxiety and depression, Quinn began having suicidal thoughts. We immediately sought medical help and thus began our long journey. It was months of appointments with multiple doctors before Quinn was diagnosed. I am also heartbroken because I know legislation like this, amended or not, makes my child and others like them feel attacked. Because I know families across South Dakota feel targeted. And I know parents like me in South Dakota that resent the government for trying to make parenting decisions for us. This bill tells qualified doctors and families that the legislature knows what's best for us. With all due respect, my child's health care is not your decision to make. It is my role and my responsibility as a parent to consult with our family's doctors and specialists to do what's right for my child. Please vote no on House Bill 1057.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I am Quincy Park. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am here this morning to urge you to vote no on House Bill 1057. I have come to realize just how hard it can be to explain what gender dysphoria is like. This morning I am going to try. Dysphoria is a very difficult thing to describe. When you're a kid, you hardly notice it, but it grows with you. Eventually, you will realize that not everyone has this suffocating darkness wrapped around their chest. You think, am I alone? Am I fighting a battle I'm fated to lose? This demon grows like an infection. Eventually, it will corrupt everything you see, and you will think that everything you are is wrong. When you learn that there are others like you and ways to fight this darkness, it gives you hope. But you will learn that the world you share with others is not a paradise. Children like you live in constant danger. Some of the people meant to protect you say that the monster staring back at you from the mirror is just your reflection. How can they miss the black thorns behind your eyes? How can they miss the gnarled roots in your heart? Why don't they understand that you are still alive under all this pain? I know that you cannot see this demon, but it is real. I know that I can fight it with my brothers, my sisters, my doctors, my parents, and my allies at my side. Please do not deny us the right to the life we want, the liberty from our demons, and the happiness that is just beyond our grasp. Thank you for your time. Please vote no on Bill 1057.
Thank you. Further opposition. We have about 5.5 minutes left. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dee Eric and I'm from District 31. I am the proud mother of a trans teen. I'm here to voice my opposition to HB 1057. This bill would take away critical health care for the trans youth in our state. Let me tell you a little bit about my child. They are a junior in high school at the top of their class. They have made the honor roll every quarter since kindergarten. They have received a scholarship in music from the University of Jamestown, where they plan to study foreign language and education. They speak Spanish fluently and are learning German. When my child came out to me as transgender, I immediately turned to our pastor for support and guidance, not having a lot of knowledge or experience with this. Our pastor was supportive and helped me answer questions that I had. I began to advocate for and support my child by learning all I could about trans issues. My child has always had an interest in government and diplomacy and had wanted to be part of the PAGE program since middle school. They were finally able to apply this year, got the sponsorship of a representative, wrote the essay required, got letters of recommendation from leaders in the community, and the support of their principal, and was selected to be a page to the House for the 2020 session. Then HB 1057 was introduced and everything changed. My child began to struggle with the thought of serving a House that would discriminate against them. When the House committee passed HB 1057, they started seriously considering withdrawing from the page program. This was heartbreaking but necessary. My bright child, who had wanted to be a page for so long, did not feel safe or welcome in our state capitol. The fear and the risk were too high, and ultimately they decided to withdraw from the program, knowing their identity was being questioned and disregarded by this legislation. As a parent, it is my job to determine what is best for my child, not yours. This bill does not protect trans children. As a mom, I know HB 1057 threatens their very lives, and I beg you not to pass it. Please vote no on House Bill 1057. Thank you.
Thank you. Further opposition testimony. Good morning, Senator. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, and the rest of you here looking and listening in on the testimony today. My name is Blake Hurd. I'm a senator from District 12 in Sioux Falls. I also happen to be a practicing physician. I've had the opportunity to listen to all the testimony this morning so far, as have all of you. I would like to tell you that in medicine there's very little that we interact with on a daily basis that is settled science, and we constantly hear new things. Like all of you here this morning, I heard some scientific claims supported by research on both sides. I also heard, as all of you have heard, a lot about beliefs and opinions. But we haven't heard a lot this morning about the bill in its amended form. I've had the opportunity to kick around in the legislature since about 2008. And in my experience, when a bill has changed this much over its life, it may be an indication that perhaps it is not quite ready at a certain point in time for full consideration by the legislature. One of the things I would encourage the committee to consider as it debates how it's going to take action on 1057 this morning is the bill in its amended form. I've had the opportunity to read it in context, and I would tell you that it gives me some concern, and that is that it seems to alter the Med-Mal statute substantially for one particular condition or claim. Now, I've not had the opportunity to engage with the medical legal system very much, fortunately, but I believe that a civil cause of action is indeed a Med-Mal claim. My understanding of current South Dakota law is that the statute of limitations for a Med-Mal claim for a minor is the age of majority plus 1 year. This would radically change that for one particular condition and one particular civil cause of action, extending it to age 38 for the claimant. That's a 19-year extension and would fundamentally call into question the rest of our Med-Mal statutes, and I think it's worthy of consideration. The committee is fortunate enough to have two members that serve as members of the committee that have far more legal experience than I do, and I would be very interested in their opinion about what someone might consider a radical change to our Med-Mal statute, regardless of whether you believe that the science is settled on this condition, whether the belief is settled, or whether the ideology is settled. I do have great concern as a physician when there is debate and there is no clear consensus that the government believes or that the legislative body believes that that's the point where they should insert themselves and make a decision when the science is not settled. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes our opposition testimony time. We will now offer up to 10 minutes if you need it for rebuttal testimony.
Madam Chair, Senator Greenfield will take that opportunity, please.
Senator Greenfield will offer the rebuttal. Thank you. Welcome back, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As I get prepared to provide some thoughts in response to what we've heard, I just want to thank you for taking up this very important issue. I want to thank you for the fair-minded approach and for hearing people's voices. This is one of the very, very important issues of the session, as is evidenced by the attendance here today. I'm Brock Greenfield. I'm from Clark, and I'm the senator from District 2. relative to some of the issues that we've heard here today, I just want to highlight that even the opponents talked about the condition known as gender dysphoria, and that came up multiple times. The question is, what do we do for people who are experiencing gender dysphoria? How do we facilitate treatment and attention? How do we ensure that their condition is diagnosed and that it's being properly and effectively treated? I'll come back to that, but I think there are clearly differences of opinion on that issue, and I do want to say I respect the opinions that have been shared here today. One of the witnesses talked about the infringement upon the doctor-patient relationship. One talked about this driving a wedge between the doctor-patient relationship. One said that it was unnecessary, this kind of legislation was unnecessary because few patients seen by his healthcare system are experiencing gender dysphoria. One witness spoke to the 19 patients that he had seen who are experiencing gender dysphoria. My heart bleeds for every one of those people who's experiencing a very difficult condition and the very difficult decisions that face every one of them. And I also want you to know that as a substitute teacher and a coach and in the past a Sunday school teacher and a bus driver, I've worked with a number of students who have experienced gender dysphoria. And I've loved every one of those kids as I've loved all the kids that I've worked with. And we all have a heart. Every person here has a heart for those people. It's just a question as to what we're going to do relative to state policy when it comes to treating or what's allowable relative to the law. There was a claim during testimony, incidentally, that puberty blockers are completely reversible. However, if I heard correctly, it was also testified that once puberty blockers cease, some level of development starts again. We just don't know to what extent they're reversible. Anytime there's a question as to what the net impact will be, what the long-term effect will be, I think it's imperative that we err on the side of caution. Very briefly, I want to talk about this issue as it relates to humankind, historically speaking. I don't want to dwell on this because this isn't the issue at hand. But when I was in college, I was in an exploring music class, and they talked about how a society treated young boys, and they castrated them in the hopes that they would remain high-pitched, that their voices would remain high-pitched. And we gasped, thinking that that was inhumane and completely insensitive. More recently, we as a legislature, just 3 or 4 years ago, addressed the issue of female genital mutilation. And we said that that too is unacceptable. But here we are dealing with an issue that is completely permanent, just as permanent as those practices. And we're being asked to allow the doctors to practice an irreversible and permanent practice that will render children, those who undergo the surgery, it will render them sterile for the rest of their lives. Relative to the economic issues discussed, I just want to offer that we don't know what the net impact will be, but if we stand for what we think is right, I would like to think that we would experience some some people saying, hey, we approve of what South Dakota has done, and we would like to go there. We would like to do business there. We would like to take a look at that as a tourism destination. We don't know. I know that when North Carolina passed a controversial bill, that they experienced an uptick in local activity. So I don't want to say that that's one of the things, and I don't want to focus on that, but that's one of the things that's been raised, one of the issues that's been raised. I understand the concern, but I also want to say that it's not a foregone conclusion that South Dakota will somehow be isolating itself and will experience the fallout that has been testified to. Relative to the medical malpractice, ladies and gentlemen, this is extraordinarily serious. And I think that if a doctor determines that the best course of action forward in consultation with the child and the parents is to engage in gender reassignment surgery, that person should recognize that there may be a time in the future when that person says, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I've experienced countless medical concerns, and the doctor has to bear some responsibility for the role that he or she played in that. And so I don't think it's unprecedented, and I don't think it's, we haven't approached this without thoughtfulness. I also want to point out that we've tried to be responsive to the criticism that we've heard about the bill. We've formulated amendments to try to accommodate people's concerns. Started out as a felony. Some people thought that was going too far. It was changed to a misdemeanor. Now we've taken the criminal element out and inserted a civil penalty. We're trying to be responsive to the concerns that have been raised. I would also just point out that this legislature has done a number of things in an attempt to try to protect our youth. This year, there's a bill before us that will seek to increase the age by which a person can purchase or obtain tobacco, increase that from 18 to 21. We care enough about people's lungs that we are presumably going to do that. In the past, we've passed bills that say that children may not enter into contracts, children under 18, mind you, that they may not purchase weapons, they may not gamble, they are not allowed to vote, they cannot serve jury duty, they must buckle up when riding in automobiles, they can't even sell fireworks.
Have a minute left.
Thank you. I would also note that compulsory school age attendance is 18. We tell kids that it's important enough to us that you are in school that we're going to compel your attendance until you are an adult of the age of majority. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I think when it comes to this issue, it is incumbent upon us to approach it very seriously, understand the gravity of the situation, and ask them to proceed with caution. And I will share this last anecdote. There was a young lady who I, again, substitute taught, who was faced with a decision several years ago and was on the verge of a gender reassignment surgery. And that person did not do that. And now is experiencing life as the woman that she was born as, and is able to experience all the joys of womanhood, and will hopefully at some point enjoy motherhood. If she would have done the other, if she would have gone the other route and gone through the gender reassignment surgery, even had she had it reversed, she would have never experienced that. And with that, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I do appreciate your time. Thank you for your consideration, and I would ask for your support of this bill.
Thank you, Senator. All right, we'll now open it up to committee questions, House Bill 1057 as amended. Russell.
This question is for Dr. Laidlaw.
And while Dr. Laidlaw comes up, and I'm going to have him reintroduce himself, just for clarification on how we run questions in committee, because there's people that have not necessarily been here before. All questions are addressed to the chair, and I give acknowledgement. All follow-up questions with respect to the senators come through the chair. And that's just a formal process we follow when we work on policy. Go ahead, please reintroduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Dr. Michael Laidlaw, endocrinologist from Rockland, California. The question was about the reversibility of puberty blockers.
Well, my question is, we've heard some different testimony here today, and I've gotten a lot of email as it relates to the reversibility, and I would like to get, you had mentioned this subject. I would like to understand how you can be so definitive when we have others that are communicating with me, doctors, and through email, that this is of some question as to whether or not it's reversible.
I think there's some.
You just say, Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
May I answer? Thank you. There's some confusion about this, and a lot has to do with at what stage of life are you giving these puberty blocks. So Lupron, we heard the doctor say earlier, is given for prostate cancer, older adult males. It's given for children with early puberty, say they start at age 5, we call that precocious puberty. And now it's being given experimentally to stop normal puberty. The similar thing in all those conditions is it blocks the pituitary from sending the signal to the gonads to produce their hormone. So in prostate cancer, you want to lower down testosterone levels very low to prevent growth of prostate cancer. You block the pituitary. Precocious puberty, they've started puberty abnormally early. It's a disease condition. You block the pituitary and wait and allow it to puberty to happen at a normal time. What's different about this, so that's the reversibility, is they've stopped it and then they've allowed puberty to happen at a normal time because the pituitary recovers, and that can take 12 months to 2 years. With this situation, what we're saying is someone has perfectly normal physiology, let's say age 11, and we're going to block puberty and cause a disease state, hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. You just block the puberty from naturally occurring, and so therefore you're blocking the natural processes. Bone density development, this is a critical period of bone density development. Brain development with steroids. Peer development, milestone development, while the brain undergoes these changes. You cannot get that time back. That is not reversible. Analogy is if you take your 6th grader out of school for a year. You say, well, I'll just reverse it now, I'll put her back in school. Well, you can't get back that time back again with their kids that age playing sports. They can't suddenly, your bones, if you go back to puberty blockers, you can't suddenly say, well, bones, let's go back to where I was. You have a deficit that you've created. And so these harms are not reversible, that's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up, Senator?
No.
All right. Further questions? Senator Rush.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Hansen.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My experience has been trying to judge the credibility of witnesses, and here we hear testimony from you and testimony from other witnesses, specifically on the issue that treatment has demonstrated a decline in suicides if they have treatment. We heard other witnesses are saying no, that suicides increase after treatment, and similarly that you didn't think that there's some regrets for surgical intervention, whereas the other testimony was that there's a high proportion of them that regret that. I'm trying to judge the credibility of the two different testimonies we heard. I'm just wondering for any further supplementation of your testimony that you could give as far as where that investigation and research was done.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, and please reintroduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Keith Hansen. I'm a a reproductive endocrinologist and pediatric and adolescent gynecologist and obstetrician gynecologist at Sanford Health. One of the hard parts with all this is that there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of information that's, I think, is confusing out there. So it gets really hard when you're trying to sit down and figure out how to proceed. We're very fortunate in that a number of the different societies have made guidelines, like the Endocrine Society, the World WPATH Society, and a number of other medical societies have all weighed in. So what they've done is they brought world experts together and sat down and went through all the articles and then developed these guidelines, which I've placed in the folder for you to look over when you have time. One of the big questions is, like any medical condition, when you treat it, you're not treating the patient back to the baseline condition. You're treating a condition, and then the patient still has some issues, can still have issues. Like one of the things that had been discussed earlier, I think maybe in the House discussion, was the concern that there was a study done in Sweden where they showed that individuals that were on Lupron therapy and under the other therapies had a higher suicide rate than the basic population. Well, if you did that with patients who've underwent cardiac surgery, like let's say if I had to have a triple coronary artery bypass, my risk of dying from heart disease is much higher than just the basic population, because there's a lot of healthy people in the basic population, whereas I am not. So what and I actually wrote to the author of that study in Sweden, and he wrote back and said, all we were really saying in that study is that you shouldn't forget these individuals. You need to continue to care for them throughout their life, because they do have other comorbidities, depression, anxiety, and such that can, that need to be continued to be treated. The use of Lupron, as noted, does, shut off the pituitary gland so that these individuals do not have, so they become hypogonadotropic, which means basically it's kind of like they were put back before they went through puberty, so that they have very low gonadal steroids being produced, so that the boy has very low testosterone, the girl has very low estrogen. And we use those, they're FDA approved, as was noted, for precocious puberty, but in children we use them in individuals like with transgender. We also use them in kids that have endometriosis and a lot of pain, little girls that, where we need to give them that. And also sometimes in fibroids, if we have an unusual young girl that has a fibroid tumor, which is estrogen dependent, we will use those therapies, and we talk to them about, we worry about bone loss, and we worry about accretion of bone. And so what we do is we tell them, make sure you're on vitamin D, calcium, weight-bearing exercise. We watch their bones with DEXA scans. And the current studies suggest from the Endocrine Society that the bone mass goes back to normal. And during this period that, it will go down, but then once they have their hormones that start to go back up, then those hormones will start to go up. One of the concerns is, about experimental medicines, and it's not FDA approved, and the FDA on their website actually says, just because it's not FDA approved and it's being used off-label, in no way says that it's investigational, and it shouldn't be implied that it is. And in fact, what they did, I actually wrote them a letter, and they sent me back an email with a bunch of articles, and they sent back that for children, and the younger the child, the more off-label drugs are used. Like if we were to say you cannot use off-label drugs, the first children that would be harmed are those in the neonatal intensive care unit, because a lot of those kids use off-label uses of their drugs. So we're using an off-label use of Lupron in the population to try to enhance their recovery. And it has been, in studies that have shown that children with gender dysphoria, if not treated appropriately, will have upwards of 50% chance of suicide, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, self-harm, and that when you treat them, those go down. it doesn't go down to 0, it goes down, a lot of studies suggest probably about 4%. So they definitely need counseling, they definitely need ongoing care as you know, as they're transitioning, and we try very, very hard to supply that. We also do not do surgery on children, you know, that are not majors.
Did you have a follow-up, Senator?
I did not, Dr. Hansen, but see whether one of the proponents had something they wanted to say on that question.
Why don't you hang on to your question, and we'll go to Senator Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Dr. Hansen. Can a medical provider give any elective medical treatments to a minor without parental consent?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair. Now, we always have parental consent, and what's really, for the children that I have seen who are transgender, they're always, their parents are there with them, and they actually go through the counseling process with them. You know, they go through a lot to get any structure.
Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Isn't it true that in Oregon that minor children can have these drugs given to them, puberty blockers, without parental consent?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
I don't know. I do know that there's some black market out there, though. That kids are able to get some of these drugs through the black market.
Madam Chair, I have a question for the doctor to the left.
Is it the same question that you just asked?
No.
Dr. Han? Okay, then we're going to go back to Senator Rush, and I'll come back to you. Is that all right? I'm just trying to keep things in order.
No problem.
Thank you, Dr. Hansen.
Thank you.
Senator Rush.
I was just gonna ask if any of the proponents, doctors, wanted to testify in response to Dr. Hansen's testimony here.
Thank you. Please reintroduce yourself, and then if you wanted to respond to some of the previous testimony, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that opportunity. I'm Dr. Michaela Seiber, endocrinologist from Rockland, California. The idea that with the Swedish study, it's important to know that they looked at 30 years of population data for the entire nation of Sweden. And then they looked at transgender people who had both hormones and surgeries. And they found that the risk of suicide was 19 times higher than the general population. And we don't know what their suicide risk was going into it, but we know that their suicide, this is completed suicide, was extraordinarily high, 19 times higher. So you can look at that and say, well, what exactly, how did it help them? That's what I would say. The other point is there's a lot of studies coming out now. They're generally poorly done studies where they'll show, on the one hand, suicidal ideation went down with these people who had puberty blockers. It's a recent paper. But then the suicide attempts and hospitalization, there was no difference. So it's confusing. Is it really helping or is it not helping? So it's up to 70% or more of kids in one study already had comorbid psychiatric illnesses. They already had depression, had anxiety, and things like that, even before presenting to the gender clinic. So that tells me they need help with their psychological conditions first, and that this is a secondary problem. So the other thing was about puberty blockers he mentioned is that, as I said, you're producing an abnormal state in the body. You're taking a physiologically normal kid and producing a disease state. And if they do this in endometriosis, they're often giving estrogen. But if you do this for a child who's on puberty blockers for, say, a year, it can take a year or more for the pituitary to recover. So that it's a year plus you're adding another year, maybe 2 years of damage to the body. And that sets them behind for life.
You've already testified to that.
Thank you.
Already. Did you have a follow-up, Senator Rush? All right. Senator Jensen, you had another question.
That answered my question.
Oh, it did. All right. Okay, good. Senators, further questions?
Thank you. I have a
Senator Foster, go ahead.
I have a question for maybe an insurance company. I'm not sure who would actually answer this.
Is there someone representing insurance that was a proponent or an opponent?
Should I just ask my question? And maybe
Why don't you ask your question? Let's see what we can do.
Thank you. Are there any insurance companies covering elective surgeries for minors in South Dakota?
I do not see anyone jumping up to answer that question, Senator. So, Senator Hansen, are you able to, Dr. Hansen, are you able to speak to that? Yeah, I don't know if that would be considered a promotion. That, it depends on the moment, not even the day, but in the moment. I'm sorry, I apologize, Dr. Hansen. If you want to take a stab at that question.
Madam Chair, we don't do those surgery on minors, so, but I don't believe that they're covered even in the majors. Usually what happens is the patients have to save up their money, and they save, and then they will go to have their surgery done after that. So it's the vast majority of patients that I deal with who are majors who want to have the surgery done save up their money because their insurance company does not cover it in South Dakota.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for the sponsor.
Welcome back, Representative.
Thank you, Madam
Can
Chair.
I just say it's good to see you back in the Capitol?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, we haven't really dealt much with the amendment. Would you please elaborate for our own edification what the amendment actually does?
Sure. Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. The bill has obviously changed significantly, and almost all the testimony, particularly the opposition testimony, has not dealt with that. And I'm just, none of these drugs we're talking about are opposed now. I mean, this is all about, the new bill is all about children's rights to take action later in life if they're harmed. I mean, that's really what this is about. Parents have rights under this bill. I mean, all the examples, if you recall my testimony, dealt with, in this example, the parent has to consent. In the next example, the parent has to consent. So I would just ask you to come back to what the amendment is and what we're really trying to accomplish through this bill. It's not a bill to restrict surgeries, it's not a bill to restrict puberty blockers, and it's not a bill to restrict the hormones. We do, under the age of 16, we ban them under this bill. They are banned under this bill, but there is no criminal penalty. So it's a civil course of action. I probably opened up more of a can of worms than any of you would like, but I thought it was important to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Senator Rush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll address this to Ms. Dansky. And I'm just picking on you because you're one of the attorneys here who appeared. But, so I'm looking at the bill, and it provides that a cause of action can be brought by a parent or next friend. Do you have any thoughts about where parents are in conflict and disagree on that, about how something like that would be handled?
Madam Chair, please reintroduce yourself.
My name is Karin Dansky, and I live in Washington, D.C. My understanding, and this may be a better question for the sponsor as well, is that it would provide a civil cause of action for parents of minors who experience regret from undergoing these types of procedures. But that a young person who has reached the age of majority could file a complaint and a civil cause of action on his or her own behalf if such person also had regret about undergoing these kinds of procedures.
Follow-up. So, and I understand that, but what about the minor whose parents, one thinks they should and one shouldn't, thinks they shouldn't?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is that this bill does not address that scenario, but perhaps the sponsor could elaborate or clarify.
Senator Rush, would you like the prime sponsor to come up to respond to those questions?
Probably not, since I helped him draft that language and I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that he does.
Further questions from the senators? Did you have a question, Senator Sanford? Because I'm getting ready to close it up, so.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at this section 3, and it eludes me
Senator
question.
Rush, yes, and what eludes me is the definition of next friend and how, and what that is in this individual that can bring suit. Can you explain that, please?
Prime sponsor. Welcome back, Representative Deutsch.
Thank you, Madam
Go
Chair.
ahead if you want to respond to the question.
Thank you for the question. As a matter of fact, minus a law degree, I had to Google that. And it means that it's somebody that is given the authority, such as a guardian, to make decisions for a young person or a minor. Now, somebody with a law degree can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what Google told me.
Thank you. Further questions from the senators? All right, seeing none. We will close that phase, but before we do, I would just like, because I said I would, we're just going to have everyone that's a proponent on this bill to raise their hand. Proponent for this bill, raise your hand. All right, and everyone who is in opposition, raise your hand. Okay, so we just wanted to, I said I would offer that, show of where we're at as a community together in this room and this dialogue. So now we are moving it to committee discussion and or action. Senator Rush.
We need somebody to start this off.
Well, you can just start discussing it if you'd like.
And that's all I'm gonna do, is just start the discussion. As you identified the other day in the committee, I'm the one that sticks my neck out. So,
Can I say that?
you said that.
I try to stay objective.
So, this is a situation that's incredibly difficult for me to make a decision on this. This is my 6th year in the legislature, and I received more emails and phone contacts on this bill than I have, several times as much on this bill as I have on any other bill. This bill started out quite different than it is now. I want to express my gratitude to the proponents. It started out with that this was a felony to do this, and when I let them know my objections, they reduced it down to a misdemeanor, and when I let them know my objections to that, it ended up in the current form of being a civil action, and I really had objections to this being a criminal action, because I don't think that I think unfortunately too many in South Dakota feel that we've got to make every action a crime, and I don't think that's appropriate. So I did work with the proponents on this matter to make sure that this was just a civil action, that it did not include any kind of criminal penalties in this, which I thought it was a great improvement. In the course of the emails that I received many horrific stories about transgender treatments that went horribly wrong, and I don't know how widespread that really is, but we heard just here today from 2 witnesses, Mr. Newgent and Ms. Sydney Wright, about the problems they were concerned about. We heard from a very persuasive group of doctors who were not, several of them from out of state, but the bulk of them were here from South Dakota, who expressed that this was an appropriate legislation. On the other hand, certainly heard from Dr. Hansen, who thinks that this is inappropriate, and I appreciate his testimony. He obviously is very knowledgeable and very forthcoming about that testimony. The main conclusion that I could reach from hearing all of that testimony is that this is just an area that's still in flux to some degree. It's where nobody really knows the answers. It's a problem that we don't really know the solution to at this time. My heart goes out for the transgender children that are in this situation because of that. You know, because this is in flux, and I told the sponsors of this that I would help them get this drafted into a better form, but I also told them that I wouldn't necessarily mean that I would vote for them in that case either, that I would work with them, because I thought that made it a better bill to take the criminal penalties out. You know, my real concern here was Senator Dr. Kurd, and you know, talking about his testimony that this is not ready for prime time yet, and maybe for several reasons, because of the fact that we were trying to put this together over this weekend, for the fact that people don't know the solution to this. He's absolutely right that this is a medical malpractice issue, and that maybe it doesn't follow the rules that we've applied for other medical malpractice cases, and specifically that it has a much longer statute of limitations on that. And I found, you know, that's the thing that concerned me the most, and probably has formulated my decision on this case.
Further discussion and or action on House Bill 1057 as amended. Senator Steinhauer.
Madam Chair, I move House Bill 1057 to the 41st Legislative Day.
It has been moved by Senator Steinhauer. Second, do we have a second?
Second.
And seconded by Senator Foster to move House Bill 1057 as amended to the 41st day. Discussion on your motion, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a gut-wrenching decision for me. I can't tell you, and I'm sure that everyone up here has spent countless hours trying to understand the issue, try to look at the research and the research behind the research to understand the issue. I arrived at this decision, I think, for a few things, and I told the prime sponsor early on that I've got real concerns about hormone blockers. We heard here today testimony on both sides, so how do you sort that out? So I reached out to individuals that I trust from the medical community that don't have an axe to grind on one side or the other, and it tipped towards the positive. I don't know anything in the medical community that's a given for sure thing. I think that's maybe why we call it practicing medicine. When it comes to the civil action, I think they have that recourse anyhow. I know that we increase the standing, but to just increase their standing when they have this action already, do we need to submit our state to the economic liabilities that would come with this bill? I'm not sure that we do, or the angst that's going to come from this bill. I appreciated the testimony from the pharmacist from Pierre. I had heard the concern elsewhere about those that dispense these drugs. You know, this bill's been amended numerous times, and it originally cast a net that really had anybody involved in the medical community involved in these procedures. But I do think the dispensing of these drugs, and including the pharmacist here, in this potential civil standing is a concern to me. Ultimately, I'm a believer in local control. I believe the building block of society is the family. And when we have the level of uncertainty about something that's taking place in our society and how to deal with it, I'm going to defer to the family to make that decision. So I urge your support of my motion.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Duhamel.
Madam Chair, I've heard from many, many people on this issue on both sides and from around the country. I physically attended the House State Affairs and I heard the testimony that day, which I'm told is rare for somebody to go into another chamber and listen. But I wanted to hear that testimony and again today. I've read some of the literature on both sides of this issue. I've spoken with doctors and well-respected pediatricians in Rapid City, and today's doctor for the day, Dr. Helen Nord. Personally, I would not want any child to have any treatment or procedure that is elective, that has lifelong consequences. This has nothing to do with ideology. It's not conservative or liberal. I struggle to see this as a South Dakota issue. It's rare in our state. And a big concern is parents' rights. I think it's a slippery slope. Yes, government makes lots of rules to protect our children. Seatbelts, vaccinating, prohibiting underage smoking and drinking. But these protect all children, not just one group. I'm a parent of 3 adult children. I've thought long and hard about this. I spoke with my children about this. And although we never faced this type of decision in our life, we do not believe that government involvement is the answer.
Further discussion on the motion to 41st day, Senator Russell.
Substitute motion.
Go ahead, sir.
Do pass. Second.
There's been a substitute motion by Senator Russell and a second by Senator Jensen for a do pass motion on amended House Bill 47. Discussion on your motion, sir.
Thank you. I also understand the concern about deferring to the family, about the idea that parents have the rights in this realm. And the way I perceive the bill is we're simply creating that right. We're deferring to the family in this bill, the way that it's currently written. And what I mean by that is that if someone is harmed over a period of time, and this is very similar to our statute of limitations as it relates to pedophilia. And what I mean by that is that we have elongated that statute of limitations under that circumstance because some of the manifestations of those harms are not recognized until much later. And that's the same thing here. We have a disagreement that has been acknowledged by members of the committee in this argument about the fact that this is unsettled. Some people describe it as a scandal that this is going on. And these are well-versed doctors in the field. We have a disagreement of opinion as to whether it's a scandal or not for this to go on. And what this bill does in my mind is it preserves the right to defer to the family, to bring an action if there is permanent harm done to young people that we have a duty as legislators to protect. I don't see this as paternalistic on the part of the government. I see this as an opportunity in the manner in which this sits before us today for the parents and that child to make a determination in the future that they were harmed and that there was a harm done by what some have described as a very activist and ideologically driven situation in the medical field. Now, the other thing that I picked up on here today was that the federal government, this was in opponent testimony, didn't decide until 2014 that this was permissible. And I think that that's also very important because the ideology coming from the Obama administration in 2014 has put this in place for us to decide here today. And I think that that's very important. We can say that it's not ideologically driven, but obviously it was. A very profound change was made. And we need to recognize that and not just say, well, this is exclusively something between the doctor and the patient. Yes, I do not like getting into that situation. But what this doesn't get the government in the middle of it. It gets the family in the middle of it. It gives them an opportunity after the fact to deal with a situation that could cause a lifetime of damage. And we've heard the testimony here today. I had a gentleman from my legislative district that kept lobbying me on a number of these types of issues. And I felt very badly when he took his life. He was transgender. He was the advocate. He was the face of it in my area. And this poor gentleman, instead of getting the help that he needed, took his life in my legislative district. And there was no discussion by the media on the front page of the newspaper about that situation and that he was suicidal and should have gotten help. And from my perspective, there were a number of people for ideological reasons that put that they put him up as the poster child, but he wasn't getting the help that he needed. And he wasn't that old. And I think that that is a great disservice to that human being. And so when we have these differences in what the medical science tells us, and we have an we have a lot of activism in this country right now that I think is largely driven by this ideology, and it scares me because we're not looking out, in my estimation, for the individual sufficiently. So this puts a break in the situation. It gives the family and the individual an opportunity to rectify a situation if they are permanently harmed. That's all we want. We want to make sure that individuals have that opportunity. And so I really hope that the committee recognizes that this isn't paternalistic on the part of the government at where we're at now. This just gives options. And I also want to just briefly address this idea that we are harming ourselves economically. I would note that after the quote-unquote bathroom bill passed in 2016 in the state of North Carolina, that in July of 2017, the North Carolina governor announced that, quote, North Carolina's tourism generated record spending in 2017. The parade of horribles that we hear about the economy every time that we try and protect people, sometimes those things are unfounded. I want South Dakota to be known as a place for families, and that people know across the country that we do take care of ours. We take care of the least among us, the people that are the most vulnerable. And so I will be supporting the bill, and I hope that you give serious consideration to giving families the opportunity to right a wrong if a wrong occurs and permanently physically disfigures them or harms them in some other fashion. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the substitute motion of do pass. Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Over the course of the last few weeks, the emails that I've received have run pretty much 20 to 1 in favor of this bill protecting young, vulnerable children. Most of us on this committee are, and those in the legislature in South Dakota are pro-life. That means that we believe in protecting those that are the most vulnerable among us. Now, you move forward to young minor children that are extremely vulnerable at this stage in their lives, and they need our protection. keep in mind that these minor children, their brains are not fully developed until they hit their mid to late 20s. Think about that. They're making life-altering decisions, and their brains are not fully developed until they hit mid to late. And that is, frankly, scientific fact. That's biological fact. And we need to acknowledge that. And then it was said that this bill's not ready for prime time. I would suggest that these minor vulnerable children are not ready for prime time surgery that will alter their lives forever. And Representative Taffy Howard stated on the House floor that North Carolina has continued to thrive after they've dealt with issues such as this in their state. And then lastly, frankly, I resent the bullying tactics and the intolerance from those on the left. All this bill does is push the pause button and give those vulnerable minor children the normal, necessary time to grow through puberty. Please support House Bill 1057.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion on the substitute motion of due pass, House Bill 1057 as amended. Senator Steinhauer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask the committee to resist the substitute motion. I too, Senator Gennaro, I don't like the thought of these surgeries, but I don't believe they're taking place. I don't like the thought of hormones for transitioning, but again, as I pointed out numerous times, I'm concerned about hormone blockers. And when it comes to the economic cost, there's things other than tourism here that's at effect. I've worked hard, as many of you on this committee, to try and grow our medical resources in this state. And as I read Section 2, and Judge or Senator Russell, you are much more brilliant than me, or ever will be when it comes to law, but the way I read Section 2, and I quote, accepts as provided in 261039, a medical professional may not engage in the following practices on minor. It goes on to list them. So a medical provider that performs these, as I read it, is breaking the law, although we've taken out the penalties. If we're trying to recruit doctors, as I know we are into this state, I don't know that they are encouraged by this law, and that concerns me, and I urge you to resist the motion.
Further discussion on the substitute motion. Senator Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank the young person for their courage and testimony, and I also wanted to thank Overall Nation President Julian Bearrunner for his good words of inclusivity, love, and acceptance of our two-spirit relatives. It really does come down to what is the best interest of the child. That decision, I feel, is best left between the child, the parent, and the physician, not through legislation. And given Senator Kurt's testimony of how this differs from other malpractice law, I would also urge to resist the due pass motion.
The substitute due pass motion, that's what she's saying, the due pass motion. All right. Senators, see no further discussion at this time. We have before us a substitute motion, which is due pass House Bill 1057 as amended. I want to make sure everyone understands where we're at. If you're in favor of due pass, you will vote aye. If you're opposed, you will vote no. Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Duhamel?
No.
Foster?
No.
Jensen?
Aye.
Rush?
No.
Russell?
Aye.
Steinhauer?
No.
Soholt?
No.
2-5.
All right, we are now back. The substitute motion has not been affirmed. We are now back to the original motion of moving amended House Bill 1057 to the 41st day. Discussion on that motion. Further discussion on that motion. All right, so the chair has the opportunity to do the final speaking on behalf of the committee. I think what's so interesting about House Bill 1057 is that while it can be phenomenally polarizing, what I do see as a common thread amongst the proponents and the opponents is deep caring for our children. So this isn't about anyone really not wanting to protect our kids. The question really comes down to, what's the best way to do that? And in this particular bill, what really rose to the surface, because there's just been what I love about public policy and about something that's really important, is that we've had a lot of people weigh in. But what it has done is really shown the controversy on the issue in that we really don't know yet. There have been dueling religious ideology. Bishops from different faiths weighing in differently. There has been dueling physician input from pediatricians that are in the room, reproductive endocrinologists that are in the room on either side of the issue, from all of the medical community that has weighed in online, sent papers, made phone calls. It's been extraordinary. There has been dueling scientific information. Now, being in the healthcare community, I understand that you can take scientific studies and we have to look at flaws. We have to understand, like, where did they come from? What was the perception? How was the interpretation? So I think there's really two things in this bill that we can agree on. And that is that we love our children, and we want to see what's best for them no matter who they are. And that from the different viewpoints of proponents and opponents, that love and caring has really come through. But the other thing that has really transpired in this is that we're not ready. And people have really expressed the non-readiness on both sides of the issue to definitively say, where do we need to go? So I struggle with the bill, and the final point that I'd like to make is that, and what has really weighed heavy on me throughout this entire process, is where are the parents? Where are the parents in the bill? The parents have to provide consent. That's period. So to leapfrog over the parents and go directly to, then we have no option as parent, is really unsettling for me. And then also in the lens of public policy and in consideration of term limits, I'm an old dog in this now. But what is really important to me is as much as possible that our policy does not, of course, interrupt local control. And I just think local control of personhood, if you're not breaking the law, is just the last frontier. And where do we go in interrupting people's intimate, private decisions about their health that are happening in unbelievable circumstances? I've not been challenged to raise a transgender child. I cannot imagine all of what goes into it. But I feel quite strongly that no government should be in the middle of that. And what I encourage the medical community to think about, and this is something that has come to my thinking over 8 years of watching, is that medicine has no promulgation of rules. That doesn't even understand the safety promulgation of rules that happens in every other healthcare profession in the state of South Dakota. Because we say, hey, we're doctors, we should be able to figure this out. And I would say if we're going to approach the guidelines for appropriate help to people that truly need it and have a medical diagnosis, it's time for medicine to sort out how it's going to come together and get its own guidelines and act together in relationship to safe medical practices that protect our people, particularly our children. So with that, we have a motion to move amended House Bill 1057 to the 41st day. All in favor of moving this bill to the 41st day will vote aye. All opposed will vote no. Rena, call the roll.
Senators Duhamel,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Jensen,
No.
Brush,
Yes, aye.
Russell,
No.
Steinhauer,
Aye.
Soho.
Aye.
Madam Chair, 5-2.
amended House Bill 1057 moves to the 41st day. I want to just express my gratitude as chair. My goal was to provide a space where we could have a measured, dignified conversation about a controversial issue, and I just want to thank everyone who stayed in that space. I think it's important that this is not a winners and losers, even though there's a vote that happened here. This is about all of us sorting out how to come together and to find a way to move into dialogue that's meaningful and rich and helps to find a negotiated space that meets the health needs of the citizens in our state. So I thank you for being a part of that conversation, and I would encourage everyone to continue to be respectful as you make your way through the Capitol and greet each other in the hallway and come together in our shared humanity around how much we love our children. Senators, with no further business, and we kept you way over, Senator Steinhauer has moved to adjourn, Senator Russell has seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Senate Health and Human Services is adjourned.